we can go back on the record. I've got just a few sort of individual cleanup questions about things we've talked about earlier. I'll just move through them chronologically, going all the way back to when you first hired Mr. Epstein. If you could just articulate what you recall about what you thought you were getting from him. You described what he ended up doing for you, but what did you understand yourself to be hiring him for at the time?
You got to figure out. Well, when I met Jeffrey, I had somebody managing my personal stuff because there's just a lot of stuff suddenly, complexity in my personal life. And I didn't realize that I had so much complexity until one day it's there. So to me, it was my personal side of stuff was like one day it's cold and the next day it's a blizzard. And I realized I've got houses and stuff that should be inventoried and, buying a car, selling a car, with just a lot of stuff. And hired Harold, and just to make sure that I wanted somebody who had accounting, not financial sense, because I wasn't looking to make more money, just someone to kind of manage things. And so today, I guess you'd call it a family office person, because I wasn't looking for accounting and I wasn't looking for investment. I was just looking for someone to just make sure that everything was in order and nothing crazy was happening. And I had sensed that Jeffrey, or that Harold wasn't doing a good enough job, just didn't have the bandwidth for the complexity. And mentioned to Bob and Wendy that things were a mess, or I was worried they were a mess. And then coincidentally, drove down the street, as I mentioned, met him, and I asked him, I don't know if it was 6 months later or a year later, something, talking to Bob and Wendy, they said, we should call him. So I called him and said, you remember when we met? I said, I've got a guy running my stuff, personal stuff, because I wanted to keep business away from personal. And could you take a look at it? You're smart, you're financially oriented. And he said, it's not what I do, but you're Wendy's friend, you're Bob's friend. I'll come and take a look. So he started doing that and said, Harold isn't very competent. Nothing's amiss, just it's not tidied up the way you think you should, way I think a professional would think things should be tidied in your financial personal life. And I said, well, but you looked at this, what do I owe you? And again, part of the con was, I don't want to be paid. And so after 2 years of him sorting it out, cleaning it out, I thought, started to pay him for the work. And I don't remember what it was at the time, but in terms of professional fees and whatever, I thought it was fair. And that's how it happened. So I think I'm giving you a long answer, but to understand in context, because if I just say yes or no, you won't understand it. And I really want this whole group to understand it. And I never would have guessed I was being conned. Never, ever. The deceit was so subtle.
Yes.
I know.
Answer the question.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sure we all appreciate the stories. We're just
Okay.
trying to
Yeah.
answer the questions they actually wanted the answers to.
Okay.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I hope it is.
And could I ask you, I think you said in the last hour, it was your understanding that Mr. Epstein, while he was working for you, also had other clients. Is that right?
Yes.
So would that mean that his work for you, you understood it to be part-time?
I wouldn't describe it that way. I knew it wasn't I thought it wasn't full-time because he had other clients of substance, real substance.
As a listener, it sounds like substantial demands that you're describing. You were, and of course are, one of the wealthiest people in the country, managing all of your personal affairs. I would think would typically demand all of somebody's bandwidth. It sounds like that was an issue with the guy before Epstein. How was he able to do that job, but also do work for other clients at the same time?
Well, I think Peg does the work now. I think you could supervise the work, overview it, which isn't the work that I do, and say you could do really thorough work if you were doing it 3 or 4 days a month, certainly a week or a day a month, just focusing on these things because there were accountants and tax lawyers and other people. And then once in setting up, as an example, I didn't have the idea to inventory furniture or valuables. And it's like, how could you have all silverware in your house? And I didn't count forks and spoons. And it's like, Jeff said, people could be walking out with forks and spoons. I said, gee, that's a good idea. We ought to have an inventory. But then there was, I hired a lady to be like the house manager who had run the U.S. Embassy in Rome. And she said, yeah, I know how to do this. And I said, well, why don't we keep inventories of stuff? And she said, well, yeah, I could do that. So she did that as kind of a puny example, but I wouldn't have had the idea. But then all the things were inventoried. That wasn't work for me or Jeffrey. It was just regularly done.
Answer the question.
Okay.
A discrete question on a different topic. We know that at one point you owned a property in Palm Beach. It was a large oceanfront estate. We understand that you sold that estate to a guy named Abe Gossman, and that later Mr. Trump and Mr. Epstein got into a bidding war over that property. Do you have any knowledge of, or did you have any involvement in that dispute between Mr. Epstein and Mr. Trump?
No.
I'd like to touch on a few specific allegations that have been made with respect to Mr. Epstein's crimes. Maria Farmer has been discussed several times today. I'll try not to repeat that too much, but there are a few aspects of her story that I did want to touch on with you. Ms. Farmer has said that the home that we've discussed, you said Mr. Kessler sold it to Mr. Epstein, it's adjacent to your property. Ms. Farmer has said that that home at the time was guarded by your security staff. And at least one member of your security staff told the Washington Post that that was accurate, at least at the time, which I think was 1996. Do you have any sense of why this home, that at that point was not on your property and wasn't your home, would have been guarded by your security staff?
Objection to the hearsay, but answer.
No.
Do you have any knowledge as to whether or not the home was guarded by your security staff, either then or now?
Then for sure not. My daughter lives there now with her husband, so I'm sure they pay attention to it, but I don't know for sure that, because it's part of the family, that they pay attention to it, but that's as close as I can get.
When it was owned by Mr. Kessler and Mr. Epstein, you have no knowledge of whether or not it was guarded by your security staff?
I have no knowledge. I would doubt that. It would be frankly fucking impossible. Impossible.
Does that sound strange at all? It sounds a little strange to us as readers and listeners that a home that is not yours would be affirmatively guarded by your security.
Me too.
Ms. Farmer says that she, in the wake of her assault, reached out to the county sheriff's office and that she was told, quote, "We work for Wexner." And the sheriff's office confirmed that at that time they were contracted to assist with your security detail. Do you have any sense of why that would have been the case?
Same objection to the hearsay, but you can answer.
No, the closest I could get to that would be sometime people who work for county security, Columbus Police Force, we would use part-time police, like at entrances or patrolling, but not they wouldn't have been employees of ours. I mean, so it's possible, but I didn't. It's weird. I don't know the sheriff.
Could you elaborate for a moment on what would that part-time role have been? Like a special event? They would be at the entrance?
Yeah, it would have been special events. Yeah, that's very accurate.
Ms. Farmer says that that summer, when she wanted to leave the home, she had to call the main house, your house, and ask for your wife's permission. Do you have any knowledge about whether that's accurate?
I doubt that it's accurate, and I have no knowledge.
And I think you said earlier, but just to make sure, when did you first become aware of Ms. Farmer's allegations?
In the press.
Did your security staff or anyone else on your staff ever alert you to any unusual incident or event involving Mr. Epstein at the home that we've been discussing?
None.
Are you aware of any other incidents related to sexual assault or misconduct where somebody on your property or Mr. Epstein's former property adjacent called the sheriff's office for help?
Absolutely not. Not aware.
I'd like to touch on Victoria's Secret and Mr. Epstein presenting himself as a recruiter. Again, I know it's been discussed earlier. I'll try to cover new ground to the extent possible. I think you had testified that you were alerted to that issue once. It's been publicly reported that in 1993, President Cynthia Fetus Fields, who was an executive at Victoria's Secret at the time, was alerted that Epstein was holding himself out as a Victoria's Secret scout, and that you were alerted to the problem and, quote, said that you would stop it. Does that sound like the time frame in which you recall being told about the issue?
Maybe it didn't. It could have been. I was trying to think when she worked in the business and when she left. But yeah, probably right. I don't know for sure.
What do you specifically recall about when you were alerted to the issue? In other words, who approached you and what did they describe specifically?
Something like Jeffrey's trying to pick up women, and he says he's a Victoria's Secret talent scout. And I said, that's terrible, or the nonsense, or I'll put a stop to it. Something like that, because it could be possible, I think, in my memory, but I didn't believe it. But I know I called him up and said, are you Jeffrey, what is going on? He said, do you think I'm stupid? And I said, because I hope not, because if not, you'll be dead. There was a very brief conversation. I remember him being definite about it didn't happen, and it wasn't a long conversation. I was mad.
So it was a blanket denial from Mr. Epstein.
That's very accurate.
And did you believe or were you convinced by his denial at the time?
At the time, yes, I did believe it.
So is it right that you were no longer upset following that conversation because you believed that he had not, in fact, held himself out as a scout?
That's accurate, yes. That's how I felt.
Do you recall whether you had the impression that your executives simply made the story up?
I don't recall. Just knowing how I think about things, I probably would have said this is just Jeffrey Single. It's a thing to say. A rumor could get started. I got to chase it down because God forbid that anybody was in the business, let alone outside the business, was dating people in the business or dating models or recruiting them or any of the stuff that we now know is true. I would have fired them on the spot.
In May 1997, a young woman named Alicia Arden says that she was introduced to a man who identified himself as a talent scout for Victoria's Secret. That was Jeffrey Epstein.